Thank you for joining us for today's PD, Universal Design for Learning, UDL, Part 1, an overview. My name is Susan Bowie French, and I'll be one of your presenters along with my colleague, Diane Angel. Throughout today's presentation, there will be opportunities for activities. So we recommend having a notebook or paper ready to write down any notes and to record your reflections. This presentation is approximately 1 hour and 30 minutes to 2 hours long with activities. Please feel free to pause the video as needed during any of the activities to give you the necessary time to reflect and complete the task. Before we start our training, please pause this video and take a moment to download the resources for this training using the bit.ly link or QR code provided. Also, as a reminder, you may want to have a notebook or journal ready to jot down your responses for today's activities. We have 4 learning invitations for today's PD. Participants will 1. Review the history of Universal Design for Learning, UDL. 2. Explore the why of the UDL design. 3. Understand the UDL framework, principles, and guidelines. And 4th, compare the difference between UDL and differentiated instruction, or DI. We will end with additional resources you can use when designing your UDL lessons. We recognize there will be variability in the understanding and background knowledge of Universal Design for Learning. So let me ask you, what is your comfort level with Universal Design for Learning? Take a moment to look at this chart and reflect where you are at with your understanding of UDL. Are you a 1, 2, or 3? Some of our slides in this presentation may be a review for those in the second and third rows. Regardless of where you are, we hope to build upon that knowledge in the session. Pause this video to reflect and jot down your thoughts. Let's get started by reviewing the history of Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. UDL is a framework for guiding educational practice to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all people based on scientific insights into how humans learn. It is a guide on how to design a classroom, develop a lesson, and give an assessment. It's about finding ways to provide flexibility in the ways we present information to students, the ways that students respond, and the way that students are engaged. UDL is also a practice in which we look at student barriers and how we can break them down so that all students can learn. UDL is about setting clear goals and having flexible means. Please pause this video to read the slide. Take a look at this timeline. It shows the progress in our education system. In the 1900s, there was no universal high school. Those that did go to high school, only 6% graduated. Then in the 1975, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, included in the law of least restrictive environment and free and appropriate public education. In 2015, Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, is the main federal law for K-12 general education. It replaced the No Child Left Behind Act, and it includes Universal Design for Learning in its language. This entire timeline shows that we have made progress towards providing equity and access for all our students. Our remote learning situation has made us think about how we can provide access for all with UDL, how to use during this era. Okay, so now in the future, in 2023, the Federal Education Plan proposes 17 years instead of the traditional 13 years, with pre-K available for 3-year-old children and the first 2 years of community college free. Now in 2026, LAUSD goals aligned with the California Department of Education with the goal of 70% of students with disabilities being served in the general education setting for 80% of the day. In 2030, there's the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities global goal for inclusive quality education target date. It's an exciting path we're traveling on with this timeline, and the future is bright for all our students to achieve their fullest potential. The canvas of our future is ours to design. The term universal design, UD, was coined by the architect Ronald Mace, who challenged the conventional approach of designing for the average user and provided a design foundation for more accessible and usable products and environments. Universal Design for Learning, UDL, emerged from Ron Mace's architectural concept of universal design. He envisioned universal design as a means to promote the design of products and environments that would appeal to all people, yet meet the need of the Americans with Disabilities Act to provide access for individuals with disabilities. These principles established a framework for developing design standards that permit the greatest degree of access and usability for the widest range of individuals. Physical access to classrooms and other educational facilities was an important first step toward accessibility within the educational process. Many schools began to embrace the philosophy of inclusion by physically including students with disabilities in the classroom. However, this did not ensure equal access to the general curriculum or opportunities for students with disabilities to benefit from what the school curriculum offered. So if Ron Mace coined universal design, who brought it to education? In the 1990s, Ann Meyer, David Rose, and their colleagues at CAST introduced Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, a framework to improve teaching and learning. Founded in 1984 as the Center for Applied Special Technology, CAST has earned international recognition for its development of innovative technology-based educational resources and strategies. CAST applied the concept of universal design to a framework for curriculum reform in education. Now, based on the work of developmental psychologist Lev Vygotsky, CAST has identified 3 brain networks that coincide with Vygotsky's prerequisites for learning. Now, let's take a look at these pictures. You might know that our educational system was modeled on the factory systems of the industrial age. Notice students sitting in rows with the teacher in charge. Workers are all doing the same thing with the supervisor present. During the 19th century, school was about being right, sitting still, and being respectful. However, we are no longer preparing students to work in factories, unless if that's what they want to do. So the purpose of education has evolved from the one-size-fits-all model. While teachers are still expected to be content area experts, we know that we cannot rely on a single teaching method to reach all learners. This slide illustrates the link between classrooms and modern workplaces. Today's employers seek individuals who are creative, collaborative, self-starters, and persevere. We are expected to prepare students who can vet informational sources and use technology responsibly. Teachers are facilitators of learning that emphasize the process of learning. So how do we do this? We use the UDL framework. Just as we know that education has evolved, it will continue to do so. These 2 pictures are representative of what society thinks education will look like. And just like how we don't know to what extent education will change, we do know that it will mirror the workforce based on past experiences. The quote on the side of what the workforce will look like is by American technology policy expert Alec Ross. It states, 65% of the jobs that our present preschoolers will hold in the future haven't even been invented yet. As teachers, these are the jobs we are preparing our students for. And with that, I will pass it on to Diane.
Thank you, Susan. Now let's move on to discuss learning invitation number 2, exploring the why of UDL design. Let's look at learner variability. Everyone is unique. UDL asks educators to consider student needs, abilities, interests, and learning goals before they begin to plan. This, as we saw in the previous slides, is in stark contrast to the approach that teachers might have taken in the past, where the lessons are planned and then adapted or changed afterwards to meet the needs of one or more students with unique learning profiles. Think about the question, what is your favorite shoe and why? Grab your journal as we have an activity for you. Please choose one of the following activities to answer the question. Write a paragraph about your favorite shoe, write a poem or ode to your favorite shoe, draw your favorite shoe using markers, pencils, and pens, create a list of your favorite shoe stores, styles, and or shoe brands for someone who is looking to buy you a present. Go online and print a picture of a shoe you would love to have or buy. Please pause the video for 2 minutes as you complete this activity. UDL celebrates the variability of learners by addressing intersectionality. Let's look at the concept of intersectionality. This is the concept that our students cannot be summed up in one word. They are not just gifted, or the student with the IEP, or the English language learner. Students have many identities that carry many abilities, capacities, and skills. It is important to not define a student by a singular identity. This can impact and limit students' experiences and outcomes. Universal design for learning allows for all students to show their individuality and many hidden talented identities. Thus, the concept of intersectionality describes the ways in which systems of inequality based on gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, class, and other forms of discrimination intersect to create unique and dynamic effects. During an environment accessible for all is the architectural key. Designing an environment accessible for all is the architectural key to UDL. Let's pretend for a moment. You walk into a restaurant and you are greeted and taken to sit in a booth. If you are a family of 4 or prefer a booth, that's great. You can sit, relax, and eat. But what happens if your family has a mixture of needs and a booth won't work? Maybe you need a place for a wheelchair and a high chair. Maybe you are pregnant and it is tough to fit in a booth. You will notice in these pictures that now you have a choice. You can sit in a booth or a table. On the left, there is a choice to sit in a big round booth. Better yet, the picture on the right offers a table where everyone can sit together, regardless of what option you need. Every person is different and unique and should have the choice to choose which option is best for them. As we know, UDL was inspired by architecture and then transferred into education. Its purpose is to make sure that all students have access and choice. These pictures are a good reminder that access and equity are critical in non-academic areas as well. So how can we design our restaurant so that all our children have access to participation in different functions inside school and outside of schools? First, assess the powerful practices you already use and build on them. If you already have a sensory safe classroom, enhance it with one or more flexible seating options. If you already use slideshows, charts, and images to help students understand presentations, start using live captions as well. And if you already invite students to create by writing, Try using a collage for those kinder students, with snippets of writing. As we start to think about our UDL approach, we are now going to watch a video from Transforming Inclusive Education with Shelley Moore, a Canadian educator and expert on special education. She is a teacher, researcher, and advocate for inclusive education and universal design for learning. As you watch this video, think about how your teaching is impacted and inspired by learning variability and intersectionality. Let's watch.
Hi, my name is Shelley Moore, and I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. As Canadians, we have a reputation for finding and embracing the strength in our diversity. This value, however, hasn't been reflected in our classrooms, which still segregates students by ability, especially students with developmental disabilities. There's a gap in our understanding about what we know inclusive education to be, philosophically, versus what we understand and the importance of understanding inclusion in our practice. This is the question I'm trying to answer in my research, is how can we find the value in the day-to-day practice in our classrooms in terms of inclusive education? So how am I going to explain this to you? Now I can sit here and try and describe this, or we could have a little bit more fun. Why don't we go bowling? So let's talk about bowling. You have 10 pins, you have 2 balls, and you have a lane. The goal is to knock down as many pins as you can. But if you don't get them all, it's okay because you have another chance. But when I bowl and roll the ball down the middle and I don't knock them all down, what often ends up happening to me is that there's 2 pins left standing on either end and they stare at you. It's the 7-10 split and it's the hardest shot in bowling. How is bowling like teaching? The ball was the lesson, the pins are the kids. We aim for the middle, we do the best we can. The pins that are left standing, we often have another chance to kind of get to them, but at the end of the day, those 2 pins that are staring, looking at you, are kids who need the most support and are kids who need the most challenge. So we end up choosing one, and the other one is left standing. I just took all the fun out of bowling. Now, I don't know how many times you've watched professional bowling, but I spent an afternoon watching professional bowling, and let me tell you, there was not one bowler who rolled that ball down the middle of the lane. They throw the ball down the lane at a curve. And I was actually really curious about this, so I called up a professional bowler. He was so excited. I don't think he gets a lot of calls about education. He said the reason why the ball has to enter at a curve is because you will knock down more pins and create a bigger domino effect if you enter at that angle. But in order to do that, you have to change your aim. In order to knock down the most pins with one shot, he aims for the pins that are the hardest to hit. Now let's just let this sink in for a second. We are taught to teach the head pins. We are not taught to teach to the kids who are the furthest and the hardest to get to. The kids with autism, the kids with Down syndrome. The part that's critical here, and it really aligns with universal design for learning, is that so often the supports that we design for those kids on the outside of the lane are actually supports that all of the kids need. This is the part we need to understand if inclusive education is going to move forward in Canada. How can we find this value of diversity in our classrooms between the students? This is not just important for the outside pins, but it's critical for every single one of us. And just think, all we need to do is change our aim. Look how bowling changed education.
Okay, what a wonderful video. Now that you're learning more about UDL and how aiming down the middle does not support all students, or how direct teaching based on a one-size-fits-all approach cannot successfully accommodate individual differences. Now let's pause the presentation and take a moment to brainstorm in your journal how you can plan for the wider curve to meet the needs of every learner. How do we teach in a classroom with a range of needs? As Shelley Moore mentioned, we need to change our aim. That is, the supports that we design for those kids on the outside of the lane are actually supports that all of the kids need. But what does it mean to enter a lesson plan at a curve? Entering your lesson plan at a curve means planning for diversity and variability from the start. Rather than aiming for the middle, design a lesson that encompasses a wide range of abilities. UDL seeks to address learning limitations from a wider perspective. First, know your goal and design with the diversity of your students in mind. Offer choices. Encourage children to participate and explore in the way they prefer. Some children may prefer to work individually with a partner in a small group or in a large group. Or if there are children in your group who are sensitive to sensory experiences, allow them to use tools or wear gloves when exploring sensory materials like sand or potting soil. Plan for possibilities. As you plan an activity to share with the children, think about how you can adjust the activity for children who need more time and more support. Empower children to document their learning. Children's portfolios are wonderful additions to teachers' classrooms. The power of a child's portfolio lies in his or her selection of what she is proud of, or he is proud of, and his or her reflection on their learning. Talk to children about how and why you take notes, photos, or videos of their work. Invite children to share what they would like to include in their portfolio, and periodically ask them to review photos or videos. Ask them what skills they would like to continue to develop. Provide a variety of learning materials. At the kinder age, most children benefit from having a collection of concrete objects to manipulate and explore. For example, it's easier to describe the properties of an orange while you're holding a real orange instead of a plastic orange or a cartoon picture of a smiling orange. In your physical classroom, evaluate the materials in each interest area. Are there puzzles for children with different ability levels? Books about topics that interest the children in a variety of reading levels? And are there blocks that are easy for young children to grasp and stack, as well as blocks that are sturdy enough to elaborate buildings and machines? Ultimately, designing a lesson at a curve means planning for diversity and variability from the start. Know your goals and create lessons that encompass a wide range of abilities. Why UDL? Here's a kinder example we can explore from the book by Patricia Kelly Ralabate, titled Your UDL Lesson Planner. Our kindergarten teacher, we will call her Laura, teaches a very diverse kindergarten class with different learning needs in the areas of language and early literacy. First, a few students are already reading at the first grade level, but need to improve listening and social skills. Second, 3 students who are English language learners need support in understanding and using basic vocabulary. Next, 2 students with special needs have trouble listening for more than a few minutes without calling out in class. And several students are shy, rarely speaking during large group time. Laura is intrigued by UDL and would love to focus on applying it to her lesson planning, but she's so overwhelmed with the varying needs of her students that it seems like a lot to take on. Laura believes her curriculum should focus primarily on building language and social skills. So after reviewing the Common Core State Standards, she selects the kindergarten level English Language Arts Literacy Standard, RLK.1. The standard states, with prompting and support, ask and answer questions about key details in a text. Laura uses this standard to set a learning goal. Students will listen to a poem, Rain, Rain, Go Away, and with prompting as needed, through a Q&A and group picture card exercise, students will recall key details from the poem, answering both who and what questions. Laura's learning goal is flexible, and she designs a reading readiness lesson focused on recalling information from a short poem. For assessment, Laura embeds a simple check for understanding at the beginning of her lesson. Students hold up 2 fingers for comprehension. She also uses a skill checklist to keep track of how students respond to who and what questions during the Q&A. She incorporates physical responses such as clapping and a call and response technique while reading. Now let's see how she considers learner variability. For students who are reading or starting to read, Laura uses visual supports to build both the decoding, connection, and sight vocabulary. To scaffold vocabulary development for the English language learner, Laura includes gestures and facial expressions as she reads the poem. She also pairs ELLs with students who are already reading and can serve as models. For shy students, Laura provides multiple opportunities to respond during partner time and keeps a close eye on them. To keep the attention of students who have difficulty listening in large groups, she moves them closer to her and keeps her teacher talk to a minimum. For teaching methods and materials, Laura selects 5 teaching methods for her lesson: direct instruction, mental modeling, discussion, cooperative learning, and to promote social skills and engagement, she selects a student-to-student Q&A strategy. As Laura teaches the lesson, she uses word cards paired with symbols: who, what, listen, and answer. To clarify vocabulary, sentence structure, and text decoding, she uses a call and response technique. As Laura reflects on her lesson, she reviews the data she collected through her assessment, and she thinks about her observations. Her reflection questions were: did my students achieve their learning goal? What worked well? What could be done differently next time? And after planning and implementing this lesson, Laura realizes that she uses a lot of UDL strategies already. This makes embedding them purposefully rather than accidentally a reasonable shift in her thinking. Because all of her students were fully engaged in the lesson with no behavior issues, Laura concludes that UDL is definitely worth doing. Thinking back to Shelley Moore's video, let's make sure we've supported all learners in building their language and social skills. Using the UDL strategies of engagement, let's add to Laura's lesson. Let's add a variety of kinesthetic activities using props. Students will be able to choose how they would like to interact with the poem. They have the option using paper umbrellas. Students listen for rhymes and raise their umbrellas when they hear rhyming words from the poem. Students holding a paper raindrop retell the poem to a partner, using the raindrop to show how the rain is coming down. Upon hearing the word rain, a student plays an instrument. It could be a tambourine, a bell, or a drum. Next, for our activity, imagine you are teaching Laura's lesson to your own students. Choose one of the 3 choices listed, or design your own activity for the lesson, Rain, Rain, Go Away. Which activity would you like to try in your classroom? Or how does your own activity differ from the choices and why? How might your own students respond to these choices? Please reflect on this activity in your journal and pause the presentation for 5 minutes. Now I'll pass it to Susan.
Thank you, Diane. We are now in our 3rd learning invitation, understanding the UDL framework principles and guidelines. Let's review the UDL framework and how it is laid out. There are 3 UDL principles. Each column describes a different principle. First, engagement. This principle encourages teachers to look for multiple ways to motivate students. Letting kids make choices and giving them assignments that feel relevant to their lives are some examples of how teachers can sustain students' interests. Second, representation. This principle recommends offering information in more than one format. Textbooks are primarily visual, but providing text, audio, video, and hands-on learning gives all students a chance to access the material in whichever way is best suited to their learning strengths. Third, action and expression. This principle suggests giving students more than one way to interact with the material and to show what they've learned. For example, students might get to choose between taking a pencil and paper test, giving an oral presentation, or doing a group project. Before moving on into more of the UDL framework, let's look at some of the research behind UDL. The principles of UDL is grounded in modern neuroscience. The framework comes from research about the brain networks, as we mentioned before, how we respond, learn, and create. In the article by Coyne et al., researchers noted that UDL applies direct advances in the understanding of how the brain processes information to the design of texts and curricula that can be flexible enough to meet individual student needs. The article by Kennedy et al. Dwells into the effectiveness of UDL adoption on student performance. In this study, they used a multimedia-based instructional tool called Content Acquisition Podcasts, or CAPS. CAPS were created using a UDL design. Results revealed that students with and without disabilities scored significantly higher on the post-test when taught using CAPS. The King, Sears et al. Research also focused on the positive influence of UDL on learner perceptions. In this exploratory study, students in 4 co-taught high school chemistry classes were randomly assigned to a universal design for learning treatment or a comparison condition. The study found that students with learning disabilities in the UDL treatment group thought they learned much better, and students with and without disabilities provided positive feedback about the varied UDL components. Finally, the research by Kumar et al. Found that UDL principles can positively affect learning flexibility and success. It reduced the learning stress and enhanced the social presence of learners. Under each of the 3 principles, there are guidelines. There are a total of 9, 3 under each principle. These guidelines are how we put the principles into practice. They are organized around the 3 principles of UDL. So as you look at the UDL guidelines, you'll notice that these are not new concepts in education. UDL interweaves social-emotional skills, best practices in special education, working with English learners, and connections to culturally and linguistically responsive education. UDL guidelines help educators design, choose, and implement effective teaching strategies and tools. Built upon the 3 UDL principles, the guidelines offer insight into specific kinds of systematic learner variability and specific ways to build curricular flexibility around this variability. Now, under each of the 9 guidelines, there are several checkpoints. They are highlighted by bullets. These checkpoints take the guidelines a step further. For example, under the principle of representation, there's a guideline for perception. The checkpoints listed under this guideline reads, offer ways of customizing the display of information, offer alternatives for auditory information, and offer alternatives for visual information. The guidelines provide concrete suggestions in the form of those checkpoints for how to address systematic variability among students. Altogether, the guidelines and checkpoints articulate how teachers can improve instruction by building flexibility into the learning environment. For example, students may differ in the amount and types of choices they want. Some students want lots of choice. Others do better when limited to a few options. while still others prefer someone else to choose for them. Now let's look. There are also 3 tabs to the left. This is the Build, Access, and Internalize. The Access tab is the first row. Here, the teacher is doing the bulk of the work as these parts are externally provided. You can see the Access tab goes across all 3 principles. The other 2 tabs will as well. Next is the Build tab. Here, the student and the teacher work together to enhance these skills. Last is the Internalize tab. Here, the teacher still provides options, but the heavy lifting is happening within the student. These tabs might remind you of the I do, we do, you do teaching strategy. At the very bottom, you will see the goal of the UDL framework. The goal of UDL is to create expert learners who are purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, and strategic and goal-oriented. The UDL framework helps prepare our learners for the 21st century. The Universal Design for Learning Framework and UDL guidelines were created by CAST, which derived from the original name of their organization, Center for Applied Special Technology. CAST is a nonprofit education research and development organization. Their UDL framework is now used all over the world to make learning more inclusive. The UDL frameworks may be accessed by visiting the website at https://udlguidelines.cast.org/. The UDL guidelines are a tool used in the implementation of Universal Design for Learning, a framework to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all people based on scientific insights into how humans learn. The guidelines accessed via the CAST website are completely interactive. Users can simply click on any of the principles, guidelines, or checkpoints for additional information and examples. In a moment, we will give you time to access the website and explore the guidelines. But before we do, let's watch a short video to recap the structure of the guidelines. So let's watch a video from the UDL Academy on how to read the UDL guidelines. As you watch this overview of the guidelines, notice that the UDL principles are not laid out in a hierarchical order. Rather than the UDL principles are laid out in progression of a typical lesson. You begin by engaging the students, then you introduce the content and skills required by your learning objective. Then they perform some activity to produce evidence of having learned the content or skill. Also note how relation is connected to memory retention. So let's now watch this video.
Let's look at how the UDL guidelines are laid out and how you should approach implementing them in your instruction. First, there are 3 principles. Starting from the left, we have provide multiple means of engagement, laid out in green. Next, in purple, is provide multiple means of representation. Finally, in blue, is the last principle, provide multiple means of action and expression. The goal for each principle can be found at the bottom of each column. Now, within each principle are 3 blocks. These are guidelines, which are supported by individual checkpoints. Alright, those are the 3 layers of information: principles, guidelines, and checkpoints. But where do you start? Well, the UDL principles are not given a hierarchy. Engagement doesn't outrank action and expression. But they are laid out in the progression of a typical lesson. You begin by engaging the students, then you introduce the content and skills required by your learning objectives, and then they perform some activity to produce evidence of having learned the content or skill. Granted, that's overly simplistic, but you get the point. Now, let's look at how the guidelines in each principle progress from one to the next. When we talk about engagement, we're looking at motivation. And in education psychology, we have 3 indicators for motivation: active choice, persistence, and effort. These indicators answer the basic motivational questions: did they choose to engage? Did they stick with it to the end? And how hard did they work along the way? The first guideline is all about getting the learner to choose to engage, or to actively choose to participate. So, the learner is engaged. What next? The learner is provided options to persist and give effort towards completing a learning goal or objective. Finally, we get to self-regulation. A self-regulated learner is driven intrinsically. They own and inform their own learning and need fewer external supports to actively choose, give effort, and persist when challenged. Make sense? Now for representation. This principle is aligned with the way that our brains take in, make sense of, and retain information. Take a look at this diagram. It outlines what researchers have dubbed the information processing system. According to this model, human memory has 3 components: the short-term memory store, working memory, and long-term memory. Long-term memory is our goal. We want the content and skills ready for use to solve novel problems, but we have a journey to get there. First, your senses are receiving information constantly, but only that stimuli to which you attend makes it to working memory. If you're not paying attention to it, that information is lost. So, learners need the information brought into focus to their senses so they can perceive it. This is the challenge of the first guideline of representation. Next, in working memory, our brain tries to make sense of what it's perceiving. The information has to be decipherable in order for us to have any chance of making meaning of it and storing it in long-term memory. For example, a printed word is visually a variance in contrast and color to the page it's written on. If we can identify that variance as symbols, in this case, the letters of the word, we have a chance of deciphering and understanding the information being conveyed. So, this guideline offers support for decoding words and symbols. Now, we make sense of the information, but is it worth retaining? Why should our brains hold on to this? Well, there are 2 main paths to retention: rehearsal and relation. And relation is by far the more efficient method of retaining information. When we can relate new information to existing understanding or make meaning out of our learning, we have a much better chance of retaining the information and using it later. The final guideline in this principle serves to help learners make meaning, tie the new information to existing understanding, and demonstrate how the information can be used to solve problems. The third principle demonstrates how to best facilitate options. First, you have to make the options available to all students for how they interact with the information, beginning with the physical interface. Next, you're giving students options for how they can express what they know. How do they want to solve the problem or communicate the idea? How do they want to demonstrate their level of mastery of a skill? Support for those options should be included, because an option that isn't accessible really isn't an option. Finally, in the third guideline, you're helping students decide which option is best for them in each situation and to reflect on their performance. Well, that's an overview of the guidelines. Keep in mind that implementing UDL is a marathon, not a sprint, so don't feel pressured to take on every checkpoint at once. You'll dive deeper into each one in future modules, but we hope this video helps take some of the mystery out of what could be, at first glance, a rather daunting document.
I hope you enjoyed that video, and with that, I'm going to pass it back to Diane.
Thank you, Susan. You will now have an opportunity to explore the UDL guidelines by going to https://udlguidelines.cas.org/. You can also use the QR code that we have on the slide. Once you are there at the UDL guidelines, scroll down the page to locate the UDL learning guidelines and select any of the principles, guidelines, or checkpoints you would like to learn more about. There, as you can see the hands on the slide, you can click on any of those and they will take you to more information. So please pause the video to explore the CAST website and resume the presentation when you are done with this activity. Welcome back. We hope you had a chance to explore the CAST website. As we know, learners differ markedly in the ways in which they can be engaged or motivated to learn. Every day and throughout the year, all students should be given choices about the type of work they do, their activities, and the ways in which they spend their time. Choices give students a feeling of control in their lives and provides an opportunity for them to learn about themselves. Students often know when they are the most creative, productive, and energetic, what materials and supports they need, and in what ways they can best express what they have learned. Choice can be integrated into almost any activity. Here is an example of a menu activity called Add to Assess by Dr. Paula Kluth. Menus are a popular form of engagement in the UDL classroom. There are several different types we can offer students, but one of the most straightforward is what is called a tally menu. To make a tally menu, create a list of activities related to course content and assign each one of these activities a point value. Then tell your learners they will accumulate a certain number of points as they successfully complete the unit. This allows them to learn in a variety of ways and to make choices based on their interests and strengths. Hopefully, it also inspires creativity and encourages some students to invent their own ways of mastering content and skills. Here is an example of using the tally menu activity with a kindergarten read aloud of the book Swashby and the Sea by Beth Ferry. After reading Swashby and the Sea, students give students choices to interact with the book. They could, with a partner, use seashells to create a trail in the sand as you retell the events of the story. They could retell the story from the perspective of one of the characters using puppets. They could create a drawing of a sandcastle or build a real sandcastle, describing how it was made, for example, using the top layer or bottom layer of sand, as is referenced in the book. Write a message for Swashby. Pretend the waves washed part of it away, and what's the new message? Your choice. Discuss your idea with one of your teachers and have them initial before beginning work. Remember, engagement lasts throughout the lesson. It overlaps with the principles of representation and action and expression. How so? Because while you are representing the information you want your students to learn, you need to be sure that they are still involved in the lesson. When they are actively expressing their knowledge, they still need to feel emotionally connected to the information. Representation within UDL is about providing students different experiences to receive the information. Representation is about building your students' level of comprehension, and it's about clearly explaining symbols, vocabulary, or sentence structure through experiences. You help them see the big ideas, process the information, and see how that information connects to other topics or situations. According to Dr. Paula Kluth, if you are committed to reaching all learners, you will want to constantly consider the use of visuals in your classroom. Do you use enough visual supports? Are your visuals supporting student learning? Which visuals do you need for all students, some students, and just a few students? Visual aids can be used to provide interest and motivation, to increase retention of learning, to clarify a difficult, complicated, or abstract concept, or even to push students to think a little more creatively. Try incorporating visuals such as photos, directions, checklists, anchor charts, and infographics. Finally, if you are using an image, graphic, or video to convey a message, supporting them with descriptions will help you ensure you are reaching your students. For example, let's say you are looking at a cartoon. The picture is there to support the text, but you might need to provide additional text or spoken descriptions to ensure your students see that connection. Thus, the principle of representation is designed to guide teachers in the design of the information being shared. When all students are given the opportunity to grasp the concepts or information in a variety of ways, they will be able to eventually use that knowledge in other areas of learning and life. In a universally designed classroom, it is critical that students have a variety of ways to show what they know. This is important not only to keep instruction lively and interesting, but also to support students who cannot easily express what they know. The principle of action and expression is about providing opportunities to students as they practice goal setting, planning, strategy building, organizing and using information and resources, and monitoring their own progress in these areas. Action and expression is about providing students with opportunities to demonstrate what they know through a variety of acts or creations. These can include physical actions, media, the construction of objects, and writing. Also, creating a positive environment for students to show it if you know it is very important. Here in the spotlight on this slide, students can role play with a prop, circle a response, use manipulatives, create a drawing or a piece of art, write a math problem, write a song, record a rhyming poem. For those students who are hesitant about writing, there are websites for them to practice writing without a pencil, such as storybird.com. Ultimately, the principle of action and expression focuses on giving students the opportunity to show what they know. Here is an example of using UDL in kinder writing lessons. This is an excerpt of the podcast from UDL in 15 Minutes with Laura Taylor. As you watch, notice how she talks about the idea of really making learning authentic, how she thought about the way she would present the information to her students, and how she started bringing props in, like a cardboard surfboard, and showing YouTube videos of kids making pizza, as well as using whiteboards and interactive boards. The teacher made a great connection with engagement and devoted time to having rich conversations prior to writing. As she says, the students could understand what the story would be even before they put it down on paper. Let's watch.
That's when I really started realizing I wanted to try more UDL strategies in my writing lessons.
Okay.
Which that was a big challenge.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure how I was going to do that because I kept thinking, well, writing, everybody has to write, right? There's really no gray area there. You need to write. And so I had to start thinking about not just the way the children would show me what they know, but how I would present my information. So it was really that what of the what they were learning. So I was working on a how-to writing unit at that time where the students were writing stories about how to ride a bike, how to brush your teeth, how to make a sandwich. You get the idea, right?
Yeah.
And instead of just modeling writing with paper and pencil, I started bringing in props and adding little short YouTube videos and different things to present the idea of writing that type of story. I brought a silly cardboard surfboard, and we brought it up front, and the kids all pretended to show me, and I pretended to show I didn't know how to surf, which I don't really. But I got on a cardboard one, and they taught me how to do it. I brought a vacuum in, and I had the kids tell me how to use it, how to unplug and plug it in, and how to turn it on. And all of these props began making them much more invested, and it was authentic. It made their stories much more interesting. And so by using that along with things like YouTube videos, I found a video of young children making pizza, and they were able to see other children making something and how to do it, describing the steps. And then they were able to use these same kinds of stories in their own writing. And they used whiteboards and interactive boards. I had them hooked, and I had never really seen kids writing and being so invested in writing before.
Yeah. What I'm so intrigued with and what I'm hearing is that you essentially started with the whole action expression, thinking of how am I going to help them demonstrate their ability to create these stories. And in the process, it was this great connection to engagement because, like you said, it became authentic to them.
Yes.
And they could understand what the story was going to be before they were even putting the words down on the paper.
Exactly. And, a lot of the kindergarten standards relate to, and they tell you the students can dictate it. So being able to offer that as an option, and for me to have the kids dictate their stories, and just the rich conversations prior to writing really led them to be better writers. I mean, I had one student in particular who he struggled to do anything with writing. He didn't like it. He wasn't really able to do a lot of it. And everything was really a challenge. But there was one day he said something about liking ice cream sundaes. And so the next day I gathered materials to make a giant paper sundae. And we spread it out on the floor, and I had all the pieces. And I said, now, if I wanted to make an ice cream sundae, how would I do that? And they each gave their ideas and the steps. And he was right there with me. And before you know it, by the time the lesson was done, he had all the pieces assembled, and he was helping me to hang it up on the wall. And he wanted to label all of the items in the sundae. And so although he wasn't writing a story, he was still writing. And I had found a way to connect it to something he was interested in, but also at his level, so that by just labeling the text with little index cards, he knew suddenly that he could participate in the writing just as much as anybody else. And it just kind of snowballed from there, because he was more interested and more invested in writing than he had been before.
Yeah.
What a terrific video. Making that connection with the sundae and writing was just wonderful.
That's when I really started.
Okay, and now I'm going to pass it to Susan, who will tell us more.
Thank you. So we come to learning invitation number 4. Compare the difference between UDL and differentiated instruction. Before we dive into the next few slides, we want to address some important information by posing a reflection question. Are UDL and differentiation the same? Please pause this presentation and jot your thoughts down on your journal. Thank you. Welcome back. So, what did you think? The answer to the question is no. UDL and differentiated instruction are not the same, but they do share similarities. In the next slide, we are going to introduce you to an analogy that will help explain the distinction between the two. This is the dinner party analogy. And Dr. Katie Novak uses this analogy to compare and contrast the learning strategy of differentiated instruction and the Universal Design for Learning framework. Like UDL, differentiated instruction is also an education framework based on providing options to students. However, there are some critical differences that differentiate the two frameworks from one another. Imagine hosting a dinner party. Let's say you have invited over 30 guests. Some of the guests have food allergies, another few are gluten-free, some are vegetarian and or even lactose intolerant, and your brother is exclusively paleo. You want to be that perfect host and you want to accommodate everyone. You decide to make individual meals for each guest so that each of them has a perfect dish. This option is the dinner party equivalent of differentiated instruction. Differentiated instruction is presenting options, but those options are directed by the teacher. For example, you may ask one group of students to read an extra piece of literature while asking another student to draw a picture instead of writing an essay. You are presenting options, but those options are governed by you, and it's possible you haven't chosen the right options for the right students. You are burnt out from trying to create so many individualized lessons. Rather than preparing 30 individual meals, why not put out a buffet? Include lots of variety, but let the guests do the choosing because they know what's best for them, what they will believe will work for their diet and also satisfy them. You have saved your energy for interacting with your guests and you are relaxed and engaged. So UDL offers students a buffet of options. The options are offered by the teacher, but they aren't individualized for specific students. Through the UDL framework, students are intended to become self-directed learners and choose the options that work best for them. With UDL, students learn to take on the responsibility for their learning. They learn the why of learning since we provide multiple means of engagement. They learn the what of learning as we provide multiple means of representation, and the how of learning through multiple means of action and expression. Okay, so on this slide, which mirrors the last slide we have, we see the UDL, differentiated instruction, and traditional teaching being compared. Take 2 minutes to read this slide to yourself and reflect on the following question. How are these three different? Please pause this video to read over the slide and think about this question. How are the frameworks different? Welcome back. Did you notice how UDL is proactive, focuses on variability and on removing barriers as opposed to the other frameworks that are more reactive? So a UDL practitioner believes that variability is the rule, not the exception. All students can work towards the same firm goals, and if barriers are removed, students can become expert learners. Another point to remember is that collaboration and involvement from administrators and school teams move this work forward. So thank you all for being here today. Okay, now let's take a look at both the frameworks. How is UDL and differentiated instruction, in this case DI, different? How are they alike? Are they mutually exclusive? And when are they used? Please pause the video and take as much time as you need to review, compare, and contrast the diagram. Please place in your journal anything that surprises you, such as an aha moment or any resonating information. Now, let's take a moment to look at differentiation and UDL in practice. Mrs. Cornwell would like her students to increase their awareness about their own behavior. She decides to have her students self-monitor and reflect on how they are staying on task. She provides each student with a sheet like one shown here. Students know the expectations and can simply circle yes or no after a predetermined amount of time. When thinking about students in her classroom, she thinks about the needs of the students. She knows that Carlos, who is an English language learner, often needs materials in both English and Spanish. So she can definitely design a special sheet for him that also shows the same information in Spanish. She also has Helen, who struggles to read independently, so she decides on her copy to put pictures next to the expectations listed. Max also has difficulty following directions, especially if there's too much information presented on a sheet. So on his sheet, instead of including 10 time frames to circle yes or no, Mrs. Cornwell creates a copy that only has 3 time frames. This works perfectly for her classroom because she's meeting the needs of each individual student in her class. She now has this versions of this on-task sheet so that her entire class can access its content. Let's look at the same system, but through a UDL lens. What if we could create or use something for all of our students that would allow them to use a self-monitoring system without having to create many different versions? Mrs. Cornwell finds an app that provides multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action expression. Students are prompted when it is time to answer, given visual cues, and the language of the app can be changed in the settings. There is even an option to have the text read aloud. It can also individually adjust the length of time in which students are prompted, and the size of the font can be changed. By giving this one app to all students, you are not only meeting the needs of Helen and Max, but are also giving other students options that they may need to be successful. So now, after using that app to meet the needs of the majority of students, you can now focus your energy into creating a differentiated worksheet for Carlos, maybe because he needs support for his native language. Okay, so now that we have covered learning objectives number 1 through 4, what are some of your hopes and fears in regards to UDL? Please pause your video to write your ideas in your journal. Welcome back. I'm sure that you were able to identify some common hopes and some common fears. Some of your fears may include the time, the number of students you may have in your class. However, these are all very common fears, and I'm sure you've also have common hopes. So rest assured that, as the video previously mentioned, that this is not a sprint, but a marathon. And hopefully that will help allay any of your fears. And now I'm going to hand it over to Diane.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, now it's time for our closing activity. Now that we've discussed what UDL is, the why, and the benefits of using it in your classroom, you may be wondering how you can put it into practice. Let's listen to a read aloud of the book Kitten's First Full Moon, read by the author and illustrator Kevin Hanks.
Ready for a story?
Yeah. The first full moon.
Kitten's First Full Moon, that's right.
I have that book.
You have that book? Great. It was Kitten's first full moon. When she saw it, she thought, there's a little bowl of milk in the sky, and she wanted it. So she closed her eyes and stretched her neck and opened her mouth and licked. But Kitten only ended up with a bug on her tongue. Poor Kitten.
Still, there was the little bowl of milk, just waiting. So she pulled herself together and wiggled her bottom and sprang from the top step of the porch. But Kitten only tumbled, bumping her nose and banging her ear and pinching her tail. Poor Kitten. Still, there was the little bowl of milk, just waiting. So she chased it, down the sidewalk, through the garden, past the field, and by the pond. But Kitten never seemed to get closer. Poor Kitten. Still, there was the little bowl of milk, just waiting. So she ran to the tallest tree she could find, and she climbed and climbed and climbed to the very top. But Kitten still couldn't reach the bowl of milk, and now she was scared. Poor Kitten, what could she do? Then, in the pond, Kitten saw another bowl of milk, and it was bigger. What a night! So she raced down the tree and raced through the grass and raced to the edge of the pond. She leaped with all her might. Poor Kitten! She was wet and sad and tired and hungry. So she went back home. And there was a great big bowl of milk on the porch, just waiting for her. Lucky Kitten. Oh, the end.
Adorable.
Oh, thank.
We agree. Adorable. What a wonderful book, especially for kindergartners. During the read aloud, most students will require nothing but a space to sit and listen. Others, however, may need adaptive roles, materials, strategies, or expectations to participate in a meaningful way. Incorporate strategies for students who need to fidget during whole class instruction, those who need materials to keep focused, and those who profit from having an active role in lessons, as well as those who benefit from collaborative learning and those who require alternative ways of demonstrating attention, engagement, and interest. On the next slide, we will brainstorm ways to incorporate UDL strategies into our read aloud of the story Kitten's First Full Moon. How can we increase students' interaction with the text during the read aloud? We want to use multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. Here are some ideas based on the book Universal Design Daily, 365 Ways to Teach, Support, and Challenge All Learners Using UDL by Dr. Paula Kluge. For multiple means of engagement, you could have an artifact box or a story kit that helps students explore a story kit filled with objects related to the story. For example, a paper kitten, the moon, firefly, before and after the read aloud. Performing a puppet show offers students the choice of performing a puppet show, retelling the story to a partner or to the class. Use puppets for partner discussions or Q&A during breaks in the reading. For multiple means of representation, try rinse and repeat. Pick one or two shower curtains at the dollar store. Curtains can be used as story maps as you draw events from the book and have learners literally walk a retelling. Place the shower curtains on a string around the classroom so students can physically walk the kitten's travels. The best part is that the curtains are reusable. You can have students use dry erase markers for those activities and wipe off their work when they finish. You can also add to your PowerPoint. These are useful in a UDL classroom because they allow educators to create materials once and refine them over time as audiences change and content needs to be revised. One of their ideas for creating great visual presentations, there's Google Slides, Haiku Deck, Prezi, eMaze, and Animoto for terrific alternatives to PowerPoints. And finally, multiple means of action and expression. Talk about it. By staging a talk show about the kitten story, have different students rotate roles being the guest kitten, the host, and the audience members. Or make art. Transform your classroom into an art studio and let students illustrate ideas on paper-covered tables, on huge rolls of newsprint. Pre-cut kittens and moons and keywords and images from the story, and encourage students to use paint or markers. Distribute blank books and let students rewrite a segment of the book using drawings, sketches, and different colors. There are a lot of ideas, but I'm sure you have many more. For your convenience, please refer back to the folder and the bit.ly and the QR code that we have provided. Okay, now let's take a look at our activity. Please think about the ways you could use UDL strategies with your students during the read aloud of Kitten's First Full Moon. On the left side is example 1. We would need pictures of a bowl of milk, moon, kitten, bug, and pond. And you could give students conversation starters about one of the pictures from the story. What is the image of? What did the kitten think? What did the kitten do? And have the students discuss with a partner. As we see on the right is example 2. You could give the students a map, like a treasure map with dotted lines, and to follow the kitten on her adventures. Students put the picture prompts like stickers on the map as they retell the kitten's adventures, and provide a transition word bank with words like first, then, next, and after that for students as they describe each spot on the map that the kitten went. Now it's your turn. Think about the ways you could use UDL strategies with your students during the read aloud to offer choice and support their learning. If you need support, please refer back to the Google folder, and in there you will find the activity, idea sheet, and UDL framework for your reference. Please pause the video while you complete the activity. Okay, let's get started.
Welcome back. And now we're going to present some of our resources. The first website on the slide has a lot of resources that can help teachers and staff learn more about UDL. And our other website is from Katie Novak and her team. Katie Novak is a specialist in UDL and has written many books and held many trainings on the subject. This link includes tons of amazing resources. These links are here for you, and you can access it using the bit.ly. You can use the QR code, or the direct link to the website. And on this slide, these are the groups and courses in Schoology we encourage you to join if you have not already done so. Please pause the video and jot down the codes. Note that the TK12 core instruction is a course, and Increasing Inclusive Practices Toolkit is a group. The resources in these groups and courses are meant for all teachers, so please join us. We are also giving you access to different Padlet resources for each of the 3 UDL principles. You might find these helpful when planning out your lessons. Again, these resources are very helpful. And now we are providing you with our contact information. Please reach out if you do have any questions. Thank you so much for joining us.